Namaste. Welcome to our 56th talk on the Gita. We're ready for the last two verses of the 12th chapter. In verse 18, he says that the worthy yogi, the one who is going to attain, is the same to enemy, to friend, the same in honor and disgrace, in heat and cold, pleasure and pain, free from attachment. We talked about that. So he's continuing this subject of what we call Samadarshana, seeing things both as their sameness, their underlying unity, but it also can mean with the same attitude. In this case, objectivity. The same in blame and praise. For one reason, because it's all according to your karma. So if someone says he's a really lousy person, it's because you said that about someone in a previous life. If someone says, oh, he's a wonderful person, you said that about someone in a previous life. As I guess you can expect, it doesn't mean that there's any guarantee of it being true or accurate, but that's the way it works. Therefore, blame comes to us because of blame we have given, and praise because of praise we have given. Next one is so interesting. Silent. Now, yogis don't go around not talking. I've known phony yogas who had my time of silence, or my day of silence. They would go out. They'd leave their house. Of course, they're restless-minded. And I remember when I was living next door to Self-Realization Fellowship, they'd come into the cafe. They'd have a big piece of paper here, safety pin, that said, "Today is my day of silence." So this kind of thing goes on because, well, they have to show you they're a great yogi. They're a Muni, you see. They don't speak. Then there are those that they go around, but it's their day of silence, so they make gestures. I knew one in India. She was European. She was not an Indian. And when her time of silence came, which was 1 hour in the day, she would go, mark that, okay? And then you know it was her day of silence. But she often wanted to communicate with you. So she'd go, and gesture and carry on. And there was one very sensible Indian teacher whose words I read quite some time later, who said, studiously avoid those who, under the guise of keeping silence, make gestures or incoherent noises. So anyway, that's not what he's talking about. What is he talking about? It says in the Bible, there is a time to speak and a time to keep silent. And it means a person who is not ready to just gabble out at any moment. There are some people, it doesn't make any difference what someone says, even if it's on a subject they know nothing about. It's immediately, well, blah, 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 blah. Well, now, I don't know if I agree with that. Because they're carnivores, you see. And what do animals do when something startles or disturbs them? You see? So they just can't not register their disapproval or their approval. They can't just keep quiet and let whatever you're saying or doing go on. You see? For example, we've had more than one idiot uh, come up in the post office. And they like to always say, "May I ask you a question?" Okay. And the whole thing is basically, what are you doing out in public dressed like that? Who do you think you are and what kind of attention do you want to get? Do they? Because they don't like it. Maybe it scares them. A lot of people are really scared of what they say they disapprove. So they've just got to come up and go, "Rrrr." It never seems to affect us very much. I wonder why. So the yogi is not that kind. The yogi knows when to keep quiet. When someone holds forth and says, "There's no such thing as God, it is all superstition," or all over there in India where all they know how to do is like worship cows, yogi doesn't say anything. You see? We're talking about dogs. Sri Ramakrishna said, when the elephant goes down the street, the little dogs yap, 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 and snap and bite at the elephant's knees, the elephant's heels, and he just goes right on walking. And the yogi does that often with life. Yap, yap, yap. He doesn't yap back because he's not a dog. So the yogi knows how to just keep quiet. So if they say, and if they say yoga's crazy and so on, fine. You just keep quiet. There are times where you do need to tell people a few what we used to call home truths when I was a child. And you have to know that too. But basically, it says, you see, Krishna says that the yogi doesn't disturb the world and the world doesn't disturb him. He just comes in, he lives quietly, and he leaves quietly because he's inside. And inside, the real inside, is still, silent, and unmoving. So the yogi knows when also to just let all, and also, by the way, the yogi is not is unreactive. In other words, he hears someone say, "Well, the government is proposing," and it's some idiotic thing. He doesn't say, "What should be?" He just says, "You know something? I'm getting out of this place." You see, when you're going to leave, like you're at a restaurant and somebody damages a table, do you say anything? No, it's not yours. You don't own the restaurant. If they say they're going to change the menu, you don't care. So you see, you decided to be a citizen of a higher world, of a higher consciousness. So the great Sanat Kumars, it means the eternal virgins. It means virginity not just in the sense of sex, but in the sense of not touching the mire and the dirt of egoic existence. And they were in the very beginning of creation. They were the highest evolved in the previous creation cycle. So obviously they were tremendously adept yogis. So Brahma, the creator of this world, he brought them forth. And he said, and now, because they had great powers, you'll help me in the creation and the production then of all that's going to be a part of the world. And they said, what are we to do with that? We who are intent on the knowledge of the self. Because you see, they hadn't been unconscious in some kind of sleep. They had been in higher worlds doing tapasya. That's what a tapaloka means. I've mentioned that before. It's where you go and you decide to meditate for 10,000 years and then see what the results are. Quite truly. I'm not being flippant. So he brought them down from those worlds and said, okay, help me make this material world. And they said, what are we to do with this? And he said, I'll curse you. And they said, not likely, because how would he touch them? They had more sense than he did. He was one who created the world. They had enough sense to be out of it. And so, of course, he couldn't do anything. So they also knew when to not react. They didn't get angry at him. When he said, I'll curse you, they'd say, well, that's some way for God to act. No, they didn't care. You see, be at peace as you move through this world. See, little fish in a little pond make a lot of splashing, but the giant whale moves through the ocean and doesn't make a ripple. That's what you and I are supposed to be like. Don't touch. Otherwise, it's the tar baby. And as in the Uncle Remus story, you touch it, you get stuck up in it. So the yogi is non-responding. It's got nothing to say. You see? I've had people come to me and say, well, I'm thinking of doing so and so and so. And just say, outline the silliest possible stuff. And self-destructive. And I used to be a fool and think I was compassionate. And I would think, oh, poor people, they mustn't do that. And I would explain what was the good reason not to do it. And of course, they'd be really annoyed at me because I had interrupted their self-destruction. Of course, they'd always say, I'm really glad we had this talk. I always knew. Of course, it meant, you old SOB, what have you interfered with me for? You presented good sense to me, and now I don't have a way to get out of it. I could later on say, well, I didn't know. I knew a person just loved to say, well, nobody told me. So I learned, then I'd say, as you think. People write to me and say, oh, I don't want to be Soham Yoga. I want to sit and say da 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 da. I write back and say, you're in charge of your own sadhana. The yogi has to be. Follow your intuition. I mean, I've had people come and say the most foolish things, but they wanted to be that way, you see. What they say was so foolish that no one with just even normal intelligence would come up with it. And they just want to tangle their own feet up and fall. And so I say, have a good time. So learn to do that. Don't look after other people's spiritual life. And don't worry. You say, you mean you shouldn't have compassion? No, they don't have compassion on themselves. So why should you? Why should you do for them? Why should you exercise good sense for them when they should be exercising it? And if you do try, you know what they'll do? They'll say, you tried to meddle in my spiritual life, go away, and you'll deserve it. Therefore, the yogi keeps his mouth shut, and if he's smart, he keeps his mind shut. Eyes, ears, and the whole thing. So you can't be, people are saying and doing things all the time that are unfortunate, they're wrong, they're sad, they're destructive. But if you cannot do anything about it, then let it be. The great Stoic philosopher Epictetus, I really recommend his discourses. That's just what it's called. Epictetus, author, discourses. He gives marvelous, sensible instructions about just how to move your way through life. And at one point he says, consider at what point you will sell your understanding and your will. In other words, what could buy you out? And then cut it off and be sure it can't touch you. That's what you and I have to be like. And fools, if the fools parade, you have to let them go by too. So the yogi is silent, content with anything, whatever. Now, that doesn't mean that if somebody says, I'm going to burn your house down, that he says, well, that's nice. Nothing silly like that, because he's a fool if he doesn't say, oh, yeah. But it means what he cannot control. He doesn't say, darn it, it's raining outside. No, it's going to snow. It talks in the Gita about people that stir up their own emotions, you know. On the things he can't have anything to do with it, he just couldn't care less. And on the things he can do something about, he just quietly does it and doesn't say anything. It's just good sense, but how many people in the world have good sense? When the people ask Yogananda, do you believe in hell? He said, where do you think you are? He also said, the whole world's a lunatic asylum. If we don't want to be like the crazies, don't interact with the crazies in a crazy way like they do. Therefore, just be satisfied and keep your eye on the goal. Just where you're planning to end up. That's what your sadhana is about. So, not identifying with any place or abode, saying, oh, that's what I am. Since I'm this, then I'm not that. I'm the people in this, I live in this town. I don't live in that town. That town's no good. My town's very good. This kind of attitude. We should not identify too much with just the place where we're born. Anyone who doesn't feel gratitude to being in America doesn't have much good sense. But you have the flag waving, marching type that aren't really patriots at all. They just want to get out and show themselves and say, nya, nya to you who aren't like me. That's not patriotism. That's egotism. So we don't say this identifies me. There, I've heard of people, we talk about being homesick, people who literally die, because they're so attached to where they've grown up that when they're taken away, of course, it isn't by their will, they sicken and die. Or we had a popular Irish song. Even when I was a kid, called I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen. And it's actually a song written in honor of a poor Irish girl named Kathleen who was brought to America and she got so homesick she died. So the song was a little late. But she literally died of grief because she wasn't back in Ireland. Well, that's obsession of the worst and silliest source because ultimately it's ego obsession. All right. So, not having this identity, that's what I am. Let me continue on a bit. I think I've told you though, but it's good. We should be so unidentified with anything that when we meet a person, we got to blat them out, including I'm a yogi, I meditate. That's not the way a yogi does it. And I had a very good friend who was deeply marked. Her mother died when she was 5. My mother died when I was 5, so I understood her situation. And she told me that for years, from her early teens on, when she met anyone, whether they were going to end up being a friend or not, but at least she met them and she was going to talk to them. First thing out of her mouth was, my mother died when I was 5. Finally, one time, after years of marriage, her husband said, don't you realize how tiresome this is? That The only thing you know to say to a person when you meet them is, "My mother died when I was 5." And of course, she was taken aback because it was so reflexive. She just didn't realize she was doing this. So uh, we develop these habits and they become so natural to us, we almost don't realize we're doing it. So the yogi has to say, all right, let's sit down right now. Let's take stock and decide what's going to be going on. And this kind of identity there can be such a grave mistake. Like the people during World War II, I was living with them, hated the Germans, hated the Japanese. Well, you didn't know those people. The governments waging war were despicable. But the poor people back in those countries, what do they have to do with it? So why would you hate them? Because hatred's inside and you want a just cause to have it come out rather than straighten yourself out. Yes, that's exactly what was wise one time when some people came complaining about each other to Yoganandaji, and he just quietly said, change yourselves, and walked out. So then, we don't identify with the nut house, so you don't have to clean it up. Steady minded. In other words, I'm going toward the goal. That's the goal. I know how to go. I'm going, and I go. Be actually like, I one time came across a satire of 19th century melodrama. And it was just a little thing. It was no great brilliance, but uh, every so often there would appear in this drama, phony melodrama, this woman would say, I am Mahanana, woman of mystery. I come, I go, I am gone. And she'd walk off the stage. Well, that's what we should be. We're a mystery to the world. And if we're like it, most of the world's mystery to us. So we've come. Now let's go and keep on going until we are fully gone. That's steady minded, full of devotion. In other words, filled with dedication, loving the fact we're yogis, not like, oh, well, it's a medicine I'm going to have to take. Loving the fact we're yogis, thankful to God we finally heard about it. We heard about the truths of rebirth, of karma, of evolution of consciousness, and how to do it. And that should be all in our minds. If anybody says anything disparaging about us, what do we care? There was a song I used to hear as a solo song when I was a fundamentalist Protestant, and it was called I've Discovered the Way of Gladness. Well, they hadn't. But you and I, as yogis, we have. Therefore, we should be filled with devotion and thankfulness. So Krishna, having described this, says, this man is dear to me. Now you see, at one point, Krishna says, I am the same to all. Nobody is dear or not dear to me. Well, that's the way reality works. Two direct things go in two directions. And that's how it is. Because there's a certain level where, of course, how can we upset God? How can we anger God? How can we please God? The idea is silly. But he says he's dear to me. What the idea is, it's an echo. If you're attached to God, God is attached to you. If you're indifferent to God, God's indifferent to you. God doesn't think, oh, why doesn't he or she pay attention to me? Well, oh, they'd be so much happier if they just could believe or if they'd follow the ways of my laws and so on. Not on your life. So then, we too, when we're of those qualities, we are dear to God because God is dear to us. It's logical, isn't it? Those who honor this immortal Dharma just described, honor it, not take it like a pill. Well, after all, you've got to do it, and you've got to buck up and face it. And no. Those who honor it and say, this is the most valuable thing there is in my life. I will give up anything else in my life, but I won't give this up. Yet I knew a man, he not only was just a yogi, he lived with a great master yogi. Sad to say, he left the company of that great master. And I met him, what would be about 10 years or so after, maybe 12 after he had done this. And I met him, talked with him, very fine, a fine person. You know, fine people and good people do stupid things, and some days they do bad things. And I mean, I really enjoyed speaking with him, and he had many good qualities. But later on, I met someone who told me that though he had walked away from one of these, a genuine master, that he'd heard about a master in India, and he wrote him in India and said, may I become your disciple? And the yogi wrote back and said, if you want to learn from me, you have to be an absolute vegetarian. No meat, no fish, no eggs. Absolutely. So he wrote back and he said, I'm sorry then, I can't be your disciple because if I became a vegetarian, my father-in-law would make fun of me. Think of being so weak that you couldn't stand to have your father-in-law make fun of you. He was a dear soul, but he was a self-destroyed soul. I'm not even going to say destructive. It's no simple thing to be a yogi. There's a saying in the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church, lower than a demon is a fallen monk. Well, more desolate, more wandering, more at complete sea than anything is the fallen yogi. And that also means the yogi that just walked away. Some really fall, crash. Some crash and burn, and some just crash and rot. But such it is. So I've gone almost 50% of the time over. I doubt if it surprises you if you come this long. But anyway, so we see what Krishna says. We have come to the end of this chapter called the Yoga of Devotion, which is also the yoga of buck up, button up, and get on down the road. I hope we all meet at the goal.